As I roved out one bright May morning to view the meadows and flowers gay, whom should I spy but my own true lover, as she sat under yon willow tree. I took off my hat and I did salute her. I did salute her most courageously.
Well, ik de falter over stach, se teshun aardige seo, be mi de kind an laur glote seo. 32 words for field. Atá dídach scrí to get Manchán Magan. Nis is minic aráte an tavian shulach gomín se scialach agus tá sun fear. There's an old saying in Irish that the well-travelled man is a storied man, and that's certainly the case with our guest, Manchán Magan. Scrín óir, Crealtóir, Clárach of Fascination, to get further down. His documentaries have brought him to places in India, Africa, South America. He's introduced us to both the weird and the wonderful, and I suppose through his sharp intellect and his fondness for digging deep, he has the ability to make the mundane special. Manchán an laur sa, Sehir Sail, Brahamon Daurger Sehir Sail atá, that this book has been in your head for a very long time. It's germinated in your youth, and we're reaping its fruits now. In undertaking the book, what are you hoping to achieve?
So much, Sean. This is almost my life's work. So I would have been, a child going through Deneen and O'Donnell and the Waldorf's dictionary as a ridiculous, lonely, isolated, sort of friendless child, finding gorgeous words and plugging myself into a world of West Kerry, but also Dublin, of where I was brought up. But then I turned my back on all of that. And I spent a lot of time traveling in different parts of the world, in Africa, in India, and South America, trying to find minority cultures. And at some point, after about 10 years, I realized, what am I doing? I come from a culture that is truly ancient, that goes back thousands of years, and seems to be encoded in the Irish language. And back then, it was about probably 25 years ago, I had that realization. And I thought, I would love to write a book. But for all I'm say here to scríb, go bailoch na rudí singléir, na smuinte, na tuairdaí, na darka singléir, that I could sort of gather all the things I had experienced in my upbringing and in my travels and say, I want to talk about the Irish language in a new way. So Shinnavi Agasha Shinauer, it was, in one way it was a simple idea, let's talk about the Irish language in a new way, but also it encompassed, oh God, everything.
Tanto gusad mechníocht na vocal, the mechanics of word and of language, the richness of it. You're using it to explore many aspects of mythology, folklore, sense of place, identity, the mystical. And I think you described it yourself as generating a scattershot of words.
Yeah.
How long have you been compiling those words with a view to a book? I know you've been retaining words all through your life, but when did you actually sit down to actually write the book?
it was 6 years ago now. So I'd written books about my time in Africa and India and South America. And I thought, no, there's something else I want to say. And I thought the only way, how do you write about the Irish language? Because people seem to say the same things. I mean, the ruddy canon cean faoin gaelnary agoni, darn, oh, the muntor go fásach, no tan rialtas go fásach. We always blame the teacher or the government, or we say it's a useless language and there's no use. And I thought, I want to advance a cause, another argument for all the potential uses or riches or inspirations that could be found in the language. And I need to base it on evidence, because I knew all those people who write in the Sunday Independent would come at me saying it's useless, it's bad. So I tried to find words that would just hit home. And I'd almost like, there's a writer, Peter Sedaris, what's his name? Peter Sedaris. No, someone Sedaris in England, in America. And he writes in New Yorker, but first he road tests all his stories on people. And so when I'd find a word, I found a word like suhog, and suhog means the track left on your cheek by tears. And I tell it to a bear lore. And if I got enough reactions from English people going, oh my God, like I like that. And I told that word once in Washington, DC, in the Kennedy Center. And they gave that word then to Smokey Robinson. And I thought, this is not a local indigenous language. These, if you get the right words, or the word like earveracht, I remember I told George Hook that on his show, the loneliness of cockcrow. And we've all been awake at that morning. We know the sense of it, that loneliness, that isolation. And we know that there's no word for that in English. So I thought if I could find the right words, they'd just hammer home and they'd show, Fiach an tanga seo is slí nua, fiach an severus, fiach na rudí nua, na diacra nua tal feshkent, tríd and tanga, the new insights that are to be got by the right word, using that word as almost a key, a prism.
You describe that exploration of language like it's akin to mining cultural nuggets, and that it's a way to dig down into our Neolithic past, but more importantly, our Neolithic mindset.
Yeah, some of this I did not know when I was setting out. Like a lot of these steps just blew me away. Like I came across the idea of Town Cleana, and Town Cleana is just a story. It's a mythology. There were three great waves in Ireland long ago: Town Rory, Town Cleana, and Town Tuya. Okay, and you come across them in a lot of mythologies. Now they are sea waves, but they're also sound waves, and they're also gravitational waves. They shake and they make loud noises, and obviously. They're said that King Manannán mac Lir sent them from the other world to Ireland long ago. So okay, that's part of mythology. But then we hear that not only are the sound waves, but from maybe ancient time, thousands of years ago. But then if I go down to Glandore Harbour in County Cork, they'll tell me they will hear Town Cleana. They will hear a wave, which is actually, if you look into the mythology, a supernatural entity from the other world. That is the ghost of a beautiful princess that escaped Tír na Nog, or the Sailella, came here, then was killed off by a furious man, probably Manannán mac Lir, and killed and left under the cave, under the rocks. And she's still there. The sound of her is still there because, of course, she's a goddess, so she can never die. So you have to get your mind into thinking. I had to, into a whole other way of thinking. Of course, they're mythology, but if it's a goddess, she's still alive today because they're eternal. And then the locals there are hearing her. And then I talked to a geologist, and the geologists say that those three great waves, they can pick up the track of those waves. They believe that those waves were folk memories of the ice sheets, the waves that were coming off the ice sheets at the end of the last ice age, when the ice sheet was retreating up to Scotland and to the North Pole, to Iceland. Water was torrenting off. And so let's say the other town, Ruira, is the one in it comes out of the South Loch Ness. And there, if you go to County Antrim, they will tell you they will hear sound the town of Rory, the sound, the wave of Rory. So I'm thinking, oh my God, these things are not dead. The people are still hearing them. They're not just a word, it's a sound wave, it's a gravitational wave. It's actually a memory of a folk geological happening. That's the sort of thing that we think of in terms of native indigenous tribes, not our quaint culture of Cuchulainn and Finn McCool. And these would hit me like tidal waves,
And that's something I've noticed about your writing. You do draw on science to prove a point or to support a myth or an element of folklore, which traditionally I would have always assumed that science would be used to dismantle myth and folklore.
Yeah. I mean, it's bidalum nor a hagantu an fearic cart or dearach an fearic cart. If you come across just the right truth, and in part of my research just about sound and things, I learned this idea. And again, the things in the book are the ones that just knock me backwards. And I heard that, I'm looking for old words, nach gluster hill, these old words that were said maybe in my youth and you don't hear them. But then I realized you go into the science of audiology and sound, and they say that a sound never dies. Actually, rationally, every one of these words that you and I are saying I'm saying it and it's going through the ether and you're hearing it, but then it's a sound wave. It's echoing out of my mouth. And it keeps echoing. It keeps on radiating forever, according to science. So this word never dies. And it becomes so faint that it becomes 1,000,000 billion times less than is its infrasound. It turns from sound to infrasound and it becomes 1,000,000 billion times less loud than the ear can hear it. But it's still happening. Billions of years from now, these words will echo out. So actually the science really, it knits kind of nascan and darad le chéile on mythosoliacht agus an óliacht agus tagan siad le chéile. These two mythologies and science tagan siad le chéile chun rish tishkin nua hort gaharda status in yov. And what I really wanted to do with this book, I wanted to make it about our status now, our status in yov, rather than looking at about a romantic, idealistic thing about the past. Who are we now, and how can we lean on these crana fertile, as Martino Diron said? How can we lean on these stout oars of our tradition to make more sense of who we are now? And for me, knowing that a word that was said 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago or in a cairn in Lough Crew or in Newgrange 4,500 years ago, that word is actually still echoing out in the planet and may still, an inch of it, an echo of it could still be encoded in our language. I find that thrilling, even if you can't absolutely prove it. It's a thrilling concept.
And it's a very hopeful one as well, because I suppose we're often talking about or lamenting the loss of language, but you flip that on its head in the sense that these words still exist in the air almost, and they're waiting to be caught again.
Exactly, yeah. But I mean, tá irid sin nuair a bhí míid caint faoin Gaeilge, dermi derare, dermi cléachló, dermi boss. We always have these words connected to the Irish, the end of an era, the decline, the death. And what I wanted to show that I never felt that. I felt this was a living language. And I know scientifically, the only time you hear about the language is in the newspaper saying the Gaeltacht has 10 years left, the Gaeltacht has 20 years left. And I'm thinking, God, these words are so vibrant. They're so alive in the visions they give us in ourselves, in our place in the landscape, in the waves, in the wind, in all of the different light manifestations, from, the word for the light that appears on a cow's udder, or the light that appears, the radiance, the phosphorescence that comes from a seaweed. These are all such vibrant words. They don't smack to me of things that are in decline or weak or dying. They strike me as things that are more potent and more elemental than the general English I speak in an everyday. So I wanted to capture that if I could.
Lauren Tuar cheanúil father dóige agus stócha an dúnachar a bhí ag an geantar sa corcaghínart is tá fá suas. And I suppose how the older members of the community around Ballinangaul and Moriach and that area, how they, I suppose, tweaked that awareness or that curiosity within you. Tá pís anna yasta go sa leabhar, beidir go le fás Martin ag tús an leabhar dún.
Kinte denime, kinte. So Shane Chéal and Chéad Lahanach agus Luanche, and that Mavahak Shielna. My grandmother was one of the strongest influences on my life and the reason I was able to write this book. So this is about her initial introduction in the book and to me. And the first chapter is called Kaleidoscope. It was my grandmother, Sheila Humphreys, who taught me Irish. And when I asked her one day what the word for a hole was, she replied, "Do you mean one dug into the ground by an animal? That's an uchus. Or one made by a fish in a sandy riverbed for spawning, that's a seher. Or if it's been hollowed out by the hooves of beasts and then filled with rain, it's a plubon. Or if it's a lobster or if a lobster is hiding in it, it's a fach. Or if it's been created as a hideaway by a wild beast, it's a puhish." That was the moment I realized that the two languages that I spoke, Irish and English, required not just different forms of grammar and syntax, but different ways of seeing the world. I had already noticed that when giving directions, I had to reorientate myself very differently depending on the language. In Irish, I had to take account of the position of the sun. I couldn't say I was heading up the road or back to someone's house or into town. Instead, I would first situate myself in relation to the planet. I would be heading Shiroyas, southwest along the road, or Adoig to the north, or Sirawalia, eastwards home. Even when someone or something was just a little way off, such as a cow in the next field, I would say, Ponvo here, Suffolk. The cow is in the fields to the east. Later on, I learned that there were many other words for holes, such as one dug into a bog, a criher, one made by an auger, a toddaher, and a cup-like hole in a rock, a bullon. Lug is a water-filled hole in the landscape. Crow is a hole in the eye of a needle. Anyway, I go on and on with loads of different words for holes. But it's that idea. And like I was 5 or 6, as you said, spending my summers Marig, either Binding Owl, Agus Maria, Cathairín. I spent my time in West Kerry in my youth. And just down the road was Mike Ida, the man, and it's a lovely, quiet man who had time for children. There was a lot of people who were busy. But I remember I couldn't open the door on the garage door. And Mike Ida says to me, he says, oh, I was trying and it wasn't open. He says, Cossanucker in Aid Nigrena, Cossanucker in Aid Nigrena. And I didn't understand what he was saying, And then he just says it again, and he comes over kindly and he turns the key. And he says, Cossanucker in Aid Nigrena, turn the key against the sun. And that idea of moving, of combining what was like the cylinder in a lock with a star, a flaming planet in the center of our solar system, and connecting those two so that you can unlock the door was just profound and was beyond anything that was in my Dublin life of, either watching BBC Saturday morning programs or, playing with ski electrics or Lego. It was profound and otherly.
Do you find it depressing maybe to think today our generation perhaps has lost that connectivity with our surroundings and with the natural world?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I know I'm rosy-eyed, so I'm the wrong person to ask, but I think it's not too late yet. If you were to ask me in 30 years and there really was no connection, but so many people, I'm 50 now, but I feel young, and so many people in my generation remember that. They remember that old time where we were connected to Rudi Creu, le Tiru, le Nihul, to things that were earthy and real and substantive. And so it's not too late. Now, again, during the Celtic Tiger years, when it looked like we were racing so fast against all these, again, I would have been in more despair. But something is happening, particularly in Mliana. Something has happened. Something has changed with this disease this year. People seem to be reconnecting. They're rootless, and they want something to connect with. And one of the great proofs is this. God love it, this poor book. Like this should have. But there should be one publication of it, and it should have maybe slowly sold over a year and a half. And that's what I presumed, and that's what the publishers presumed. And they put out 5,000 books. And like 4 days later, they were all gone. That would never have happened before. It's a book about the bloody Irish language. And it wasn't because the book was good. No, nobody had read the book. Do you know?
You'd be very hard on yourself. It's a good book. It helps.
Well, it turned out it's not so bad. But they didn't know that when they bought the 5,000 copies. And then a week later, they snapped up the next 5,000. We have this hunger. So, and we now have all of these techniques with Duolingo and internet. We could very quickly learn the grammar on the internet, and then just enough Kirkle Cora, enough circles. It wouldn't be hard for us to come back again. So ask me in 10 years' time, am I despairing? But at the moment, I see signs of hope.
Well, I'm low clap begon, Margell, at a cell, agus na púcaí, agus na spridina. My grandmother's generation, I think they had a different way of living life and looking at life and understanding life. They were pre-electricity, and I think that bestowed upon them a different mindset. You discuss that in quite a lot of detail in your book, how boundaries were blurred and how reality and the other world existed in harmony alongside one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I suppose every author has an agenda, and this is my secret agenda, and I don't really address it in the book, but I do feel that we need that there is this hunger in us to have meaning at the moment. And again, just by then, I was a sort of child who was always away with the other world. I'd hear these positive voices in my head. It was like I always had that connection with something bigger than myself. And it was, I suppose, what would have been called the other world. You were easily able to have conversations with other beings. And I realize now that when everyone is going going on their yoga mat or they're studying mindfulness, they're again trying to find connection with something bigger. And we used to find it in the church, and the church was amazingly useful. You know, every single kid would complain about going to church, but we got something out of it, having a bigger entity. You know, we laugh at it now, but it was important to us, and that's gone. And so I think for the good of everyone, we would love to have something like that. And so I focus on how important the magical world, the other world, the Sail She was to the Irish language, because it's one way we could reconnect to a grander vision through the language. I mean, people, if they want to go into Buddhism, or if they want to go and study, you know, yogic mantras, we can do that too. But it just happens for not only 2,000 years, but 3,000, 4,000 years, we have had this internal life where we've believed in, I make the difference in the book between encounter and alter. Encounter is this district or region or area. And then it was a word I found in the dictionary, alter. It blew me away. It was the opposite to counter. So if this counter is this place, this district, this region, alter is the other world. And again, as you said, your grandmother's generation and all of our grandmother's generation could have told us that there was only a thin line between counter and alter. And there was always people who could jump from one to the other. And that is such a relief to every one of us. We need to be able to escape from the hardness, from the crampness, from the confinement of our troubles and of the limited human world. And so I really tried to show this language of ours that we're turning our back on is every single, almost second word of it is attuned to not only connecting, focusing on this level to the most in excessive degree, you know, the minutiae of the earth and the natural world, but also immediately springboarding out into the infinite with the flick of a switch. And that can be reassuring and sort of nourishing for all of us.
And you mentioned there, I suppose, the role of religion and Catholicism in the context of Ireland, and how that stifled a lot of that imagination and that creativity. But I'm always conscious of the fact that, you know, it still retained its strength in the sense that we kept our holy wells, we kept our Tinnaveltna, we kept the Ran's Day in Dingle. Agus sin schlitte atá a gine chun an canal son a chimad is doch lenar venúlacht a chomeile sin lenar nóchas a hen siarmach fad ó hef amahor.
Dear, I mean, you know, Réidhleán in ish got the Harlan nor in raid Dorachan, the Dark Ages when you know Déirtear the Monigig to spawn, the Kamad, the Cravenu, Quid the Solace and Tail. You know, it said that the monks and those sort of enlightened either druids in Ireland and knowledgeable people of the field of the forest were keeping a spirit of a grander vision alive during the Dark Ages. And almost you could say the same about the end of the 20th century, when the whole of America and Europe went towards this reductive view of the materialistic world. And of course, Ireland did too. We were a bit slower than everyone else, but because we were slower, as you said, we kept all this amazing amount of knowledge of all those, the Tubrach Banach, all the holy wells, all of the mythology. And yes, we started laughing at it in the last 20 or 30 years, but the knowledge didn't die. There's people in every community who know of every holy well, who know of every particular sod of turf or sod of field that had a strength to it. And now that all of us seem to realize we're a bit listless and lost, and we're turning back towards things, not just in Ireland, but, you know, in Europe and America and throughout the world, it could again be the time where we step forward in the same ways that Native Americans in South America and America are beginning to unite again and say, actually, this knowledge, you've oppressed us for so long, but you might need to know again that there is a God of all things, that everything is connected, every raindrop, every tree, every molecule of the earth, just as geologists and soil and tree experts are finding with the mycorrhizae and the worldwide web of roots under the ground, that the Native Americans are coming forward, and even the Aboriginal people, the native tribes. And we never saw ourselves as an Aboriginal or native people. We see ourselves as colonized. But actually, it just happens that some of our culture and our learning goes as far back as theirs. And if we take it to ourselves again, if we take on mahogamy don tolas agus an crinach agus on kind of diakasha harish coin fein, if we take on board the wisdom that I could say our ancestors, but that sounds like our grandparents kept alive for us, we could become a lot stronger, a lot more rooted. And that would help us, but also we could spread that information out. You know, it could help the world.
Yeah, that connection between, I suppose, the world of myth and legend and the physical landscape, it can be quite potent. I often think of Comalochic under Mount Brandon, on Glean War Fadison, a Ruhin Stach Fan Gunuk. Agus tá com na Cailí it's an os the Choirmach, the com na Cailí, the overhanging glen up high, and on the Chlach, she's up there, the hag, calcified in time almost, ready to wake at any moment. And then you've got the moor grass known as Squib na Cailí.
Yeah.
The hag's brush. She plays a big part in your book on the Chlach. You're quite fond of her.
Yeah, I am. And again, I wouldn't have thought it 6 years ago when I started out, but every road I'd go down, every road I'd go down, I'd end up on a female energy or a female outlook, because either you're getting lost in local medicines, herbal medicines that were often the paradigm of the women, or so many of the old landscape stories end up with the Cailleach making the land, creating the land at the very beginning, being almost the pre-goddess before everyone else. And you think, God, no wonder we think of Finn McCool and Cuchulainn when we think of Finn stories, but our mythology in Ireland. But the minute you get behind them, you realize, oh no, they're just a layer put on top of a far older female goddess or female story. And then you think, oh my, wherever you're going, it's about, because it was about the creativity and the womb and nature connecting with the soil, that had to be female. So the minute you scratch any Irish mythology or any Irish Shanachal, you come across the female. And then I just come across the Cailleach in so many different forms, as you say. Either like, in Loch Crew, so the great cave which is right beside me in Westmeath, the passage grave, it's Loch na Callie. And even where I live, it's called Collinstown. It's actually Bailin na Gailach, the townland of the wise women or the witches. And then you dig into that and you realize that these women, the earlier takes of the Cailleach, she's saying, I remember a time when the Atlantic was still forest in a valley. And that sounds like rubbish. Then you talk to the geologists and they say, yes, the Atlantic was a forest in a valley. And then there was a big split, the two land masses split and caused the Atlantic. So somehow, just like the Native American, the song lines, the Churunga lines, somehow remember the wisdom of the time before humans. They remember the beginnings of society. It seems that some of our mythology, particularly the ones around the Cailleach, remember the times of the early creation of the landscape. When the first settlers were arriving here and the ice sheet was retreating, the things they were seeing, the ice sheet retreating and the land being formed, and that was then encoded in memory in the form of the woman. And it just kills me that because I'm a man, I wasn't able to get under a lot of that surface. Like, there's a much better book than mine to be written by a woman going out to all the local people, to the women, and asking them the stories of what do they know about the Cailleach, what do they know about the connection of the female in the landscape. Like, it's so profound and waiting to be discovered.
I suppose one of the most striking sentences in the book, it's the beginning of a chapter, and it goes as follows. After 3 chapters focused on the feminine, let us turn to the penis. A fairly arresting statement. But following on from on Chlach, you go on to discuss the words associated with sex. And it's quite masculine in what has been preserved. You feel that there's an absence, or that we failed to fully capture the richness of the language there in terms of what's been documented.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I would have been in despair about this, thinking it's gone. Like, there are some things that are gone. The medicinal knowledge, the herbal knowledge that was, as said, under the women's wisdom, I think that's gone. Like, the knowledge of mushrooms, there must have been knowledge about the medicinal uses of mushrooms, the herbal, the psychological uses, the psychotropic uses. That's all gone. And it was probably in the domain of women, but they never were asked. And on purpose, they kept it to themselves. But the sexual side, I mean, I'm not rooted enough in the Gaeltacht to have first-hand experience of that. Noel Nironal tells the great story. She thought there was no words for sexuality in Irish, and then she marries, and then the minute she's married, she's brought into the back kitchen, and she hears words and terms and stories and words of describing the female condition and the female mindset that she'd never heard before. Now, I'm not rooted enough in the Gaeltacht to get that, so I relied on, there's a great, Cushcane published a great book of sexual terms, and I quoted a lot. I think I have 42. Oh, which?
Ogliamal go Ginunt.
Shine, Shindir, yeah. I quote, I think, 42 different words for the penis, a lot of them connected to the seaweed, and a lot of them derogatory, you know, about little limpid bits and little saggy bits and little just humorous words. And again, but all the words for fornication, a lot of them were masculine. They were about the man, you know, pinning the woman or taking control. So there must be a lot more subtle and sensitive, or at least one would hope that there might be words to do with the female orgasm, to do with that other sensitivity side. And I would have said it would have been hard to get, but I'm doing a project at the moment this year, right through COVID, called Sea Tamagotchi, collecting coastal words. Not in Kerry, but in Donegal and Galway and Mayo. And I just, you know, you ask people who's the greatest fisherman with all the words. You go to one man and he's giving you immediately like the most beautiful words. So and a lot of these men, they said, I haven't said this word for 70 years or for 80 years. I heard my grandfather say it 80 years ago. Now, it was so easy to get those words, but it's the same. If a woman with an open mind goes around these communities and gets the trust, particularly I suppose one from the area, I think there is such riches to be got there about, the woman's side of sexuality and just the woman's view on the landscape and life. I'd love to see that book.
And your book actually solved a great mystery for me, a local mystery. Ballinronnig, there's a rock there at the headland of Réidhleán, very prominent rock, and it's called Carragivivine. And I inquired locally at the time when I was collecting the name, and I was told it might come from Bean Vaughan, the white gable, because the birds sit up there and dirty the rock with white poo, and that Mia Vaughan says stillish shaha. It's a kind of a dillisk in your book.
Yeah. Oh God. When this book went to press, I went to the publishers a year ago. In the last year, because of Sea Tamagotchi, my God, the amount of words I'm getting for seaweeds in the last year in Donegal and Mayo and Sligo. And again, all of the words for all the seaweeds when it's connected to the rock. And then each of the seaweeds seem to have a different word when they wash ashore, which I had no idea. And I hadn't found those in the dictionary. They're still out there. Like, we're at an amazing time now because, really 20 years ago, we didn't have the perspective, or a lot of us didn't have the resources. We were struggling to do that. And then if I had collected the words, what would I have done with them? Put them into known manuscripts. Now with internet, you could every word I find, I can put up on Instagram, Twitter, and people get excited. And in one way, it's a gimmick, you could say. A word isn't going to save a language, but every single thing that makes us realize, wait there, we have this showed leachran, showed lochrul shohagwin, that we have this amazing precious jewel that we can preserve, might encourage us to look at our language other than saying, oh, it's a useless language, I should learn Chinese, or oh, it was beaten into me. Thinking, actually, this might be very useful to me to enrich my world take, my view on the world, and my understanding of how I'm rooted. And not only that, from a practical way, how I can grow vegetables in the wind, how I can collect the right seaweeds to nourish the soil or to feed myself through the bad winters. It's all there waiting for us. And for me, that's phenomenally exciting.
So, Vanachan, Lauren to hocht na loganimacha agus an clig running shed beha at a dive how place names can generate personality in nothingness, essentially in the wilderness. And in particular, you talk about this place, Loch La. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yeah, exactly. Loch and La. And in English, it's either Loch and Lay or Loch and La. And different people in Cavan have told me different ones, but I need to get it right. And I used to be taught that it was Loch and Lice, so the lake of the cure, but actually it's La, the physician, or both, the cure or the physician. And again, I'd heard the word. I'm not too far from it. It's up in Cavan. And I went to, will I tell you this or should I read this bit?
I think read it. It's a lovely piece of writing.
Okay, but now if I go on too long, you just tell me, okay? So, Loch and Lay or Loch and La, I need to work out the correct pronunciation of that, is now an unassuming hill in East County Cavan, between Baileyborough and Kingscourt. Parts of it are covered in heather and gorse, but most is now blanketed under dense plantation of spruce and pine. Hearing that its name in Irish is Loch an La, the lake of the physician, and that it was renowned for its cures, starts you on a journey of discovery that can transform the place and your sense of the world. Firstly, you notice that there's no longer a lake, and you wonder why. More careful observation shows that there are 3 species of heather growing there, and that these reveal a healthy ancient peatland underfoot, and that this This suggests that this was once a wetland area, And this has been dried by the introduction of ditches so that the peat could be extracted as fuel. But what about the cures that were in the lake? So I look around and I see the heathers there, see 3 different heathers, and that makes me think, okay, there's more to this name. Maybe it is true. But then I think, what about these cures? A local person will talk of ancestors who were healed of scurvy, of shingles and mumps by the lake's waters. And they will explain that the water from the mud at the bottom of the lake was considered so powerful against rosacea. I forget how to pronounce that word. You know, the blushing of the cheeks, rosacea. I don't know. It used to be very common until 30 years ago. And even leprosy that was sent to far distant parts. And again, I was up there walking and I knew the name, and then I looked around, saw the heather, and then a man was walking and he told me, oh no, it used to be used as a cure. And then I looked up more and I found that there was a story about a goat herd there called Peggy Dunt. And she helped bestow supernatural abilities on the lake during the era of the penal laws in the 17th and 18th century. Peggy was out tending her goats when she spotted English soldiers coming from the direction of Moy Bulliga, and she immediately began filling her apron with stones, which she collected not to fire at the soldiers or to drown herself in the lake, but to throw at the goats. So they rushed down past the priest who was illicitly saying mass on the remote hillside and would have been captured if caught. The priest, realizing that the goats were sent there by her, hurled his chalice into the lake, and just before the soldiers arrived, and he was able to escape. And he told them, and the followers, he told the soldiers they were out picking frohans. And when I was up there, you can see still the frohans still growing there, the bilberries still growing there. But the minute I heard that story about Peggy Dunt, okay, it's just a woman in the 17th or 18th century, but when she talks about that apron, like you know, and any of us who've read our stories, we know that Cailleach always wears an apron. And as I said, Loch Crew, the passage grave, is just up the road from me. And it was created by the Cailleach flying over the area and dropping the stones from her apron to create these cairns. And so I think, oh my God, this isn't just Peggy Dunt in the 17th century. That's the version of the 17th century, but previous it was the Cailleach. And so I look around the landscape and sure enough, I see 3 cairns, 3 stone clumps, you know, on top of the 3 highest peaks in the area. One had a mobile phone mast on top of it, but you could still see it. So I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm uncoding it like Sherlock Holmes. I'm thinking these cairns are just like my Loch Crew cairns about 40 miles away. They were, you know, Neolithic or possibly megalithic, most likely Neolithic sites of worship, which was why then the story was told about the lake being here. And then when I looked around thinking, okay, there's no sign of the lake. And then I finally found the wettest part and I found sedges and reeds still in the lake. And I realized that's where the lake was. And it had obviously been drained a while ago. So you're undoing the landscape. First, you're seeing the lake that might have been only got rid of 20 years ago when they forested it. And then you're finding the story in the 17th or 18th century during the penal laws. And then you're going right back to 4,500 years ago in that same place, all because of that one name. It becomes, as I say, this key, this prism. It unlocks the whole thing, and you're in a time warp. You're standing in the same place, but the time-space continuum has suddenly begun to warble, and you're way back. And as I say, the Cailleach is in there. The Cailleach always appears. She's everywhere.
And I think it really illustrates, I suppose, the power of a place name in unlocking. Like you're standing there in the middle of nowhere on the side of a mountain. There's nothing to be seen. And through the one place name, then you unlock all this cultural activity through that name.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's that other one in Leitrim, fossil hour. It sort of means nothing when you hear about it. And then you look at the Irish version. I know so many of us do this now when we're driving around. One of the benefits of the 2 signposts. And it's first the words seem complicated, but then you learn a few of them. So fossil hour means nothing, but then fosach on lovert. We know Foss is growth, and actually Fossach is a desert or a place where the growing, it's either the wild growth or no growth, either one. But so Fossach, the place that's gone wild, it's Foss. On Lovegurt, most of us understand from the herb section of the supermarket, love means herb. So the Lovegurt, the garden of the herbs that is turned into a wilderness. So this was obviously a medicinal garden or a herbal garden owned by some, you know, obviously a woman, because they were the ones who were in charge of the medicinal practices and the magic plants. And this had been allowed to go to seed. And then you think, God, who was this woman? What was her knowledge? What were the plants here? And obviously you go up there looking for any strands of seeds because there's great work now done on botany showing that, like Alexander's a tree, a sort of an umbral plant you see all over the west coast of Ireland, but it's only there in places like where a monastery was there or a castle. Alexander's, it's named after Alexandria. The monks brought it in Ireland in the 5th century from Alexandria, through the Middle East, and it's still growing in those areas where the monks would have been. So the herbs will unlock the same thing for you. And if you get a Lovegurt, you're going back to Fossil Lowert and looking for some of the seeds of that same herbs that might have been there 1,000 years ago. It really is a discovery journey.
Kind of the stuff go tracht an saucepan dove, the black saucepan. That was in use. It was a potion, a love potion. And if they were attempting to make a match, the man would be plied with this drink, and the visual appearance of the woman would improve greatly within a matter of minutes, and the match would be made. But it was known as the saucepan dove.
And are you the same as me? When you hear that, I just want to know what the plants were. Does anyone know even one of the plants? It's to get the details, because we have those lovely mythology, but we realize we still could find at least the name of some of those plants, and then to try the plants. It's that idea of there's a new type of archaeology now, isn't it? I don't know, practical biology. But I want to find the herbs, make the potion, and try the potion. That'll bring us.
That would be a good seller.
Oh yeah, exactly. We'll team up with it. Nick and you will have our own brand. Get into Super Value. They're very good about protecting local foods.
Manachan Vishara. Nach Torv Novokal Data and so you're not lamenting the loss of words, but is it an incantation? Are you invoking the power of words? Are you trying to revisit these words? Are you trying to catch these words from the air?
Exactly. Yeah, it's sort of both. It's a Keluda, so it's a celebration of the words, and then, as you said, realizing I believe these words have power. So if one utters them out, they can cast spells on people. They can lure us back. So the thing was to find those words that really echoed and radiated. And as you said, I know I don't start the book. I used to start the book with the very first incantation. Like, it's so hilarious that our mythology, Lower and Gavoile, tells us that the first words spoken in this island were this incantation in Kerry by Amergain, the first poet, the first druidic powerful figure who said this word, am gwe, am wed, am ton trehen, am fuim. He announced that he was, the wave and the sea, the ocean roar, the stag of 7 times. The words were enough to summon the world into being. We came out of this nothingness of the word. So there is still this power in words. And I was hoping if I get the right words, if I'd get the words that would really sort of, go into our DNA, that would unlock that thing, that I might be able to stir something bigger. So it's in no way is it an academic book. The chapters are they're small, that I skirt along things. But what I'm hoping is that one word will spark something else in someone's mind, and they will find something triggered in their mind, a memory from their grandmother or from their childhood or from seeing a place name, and that they might make their own journey. So it was a juggling act.
Chasagach lehanach domhain, vi sa fálam, vi rod no le fálam gom gach lehanach agus Treslim the Laurlat, Laur Glow at 32 words for field. I don't think we'd even discussed fields in this brief conversation we've had, which is a credit to the book. So it's available in all good bookshops throughout the country, as you say. A fantastic gift. Buy 32 of them and give them as 32 gifts. I guess we right to move. Mille mahagat as Laurtlum. Agus go hard agus ríist an chiad ócáile ceithre chlog bheith sé tosnú agus beag snéad níomhálachain siúníoin agus áiní bheisláin bheith siad mun chórá agus siad a caint ar na leabhra is mó a heníon beha. Gur míle maith agat bhanacháin.
Fáidirá a teáin, nuíochas.